Intelligence. Got it. So the idea was I wanted this final one to be around sort of like decentralized AI and data and compute. And then Andy came up and I was like, oh, I don't know what to call it. And Andy came up with a great term of open intelligence, which I think is really exciting. Also, my background is actually, I was a cognitive neuroscientist, but I sort of was researching specifically a lot on intelligence, and I find it really interesting. And then I went to work in AI before, falling down the Web3 rabbit hole. So I'm super excited about this one. And we've got three amazing guests. So we've got Richard Blythman, we've got Floyd, and we've got Saffron Huang. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a bio for each of the three. And then the format is they'll each have 5 minutes each to explain their work. I forgot to time last time, so I'm going to try remember to time this time. And then we'll have sort of like an open and shared discussion among all of us. And just to reiterate, it's not really meant to be a panel. So please do just unmute yourself if you want to say or add anything. You could also type in the chat or put your hand up as well if you prefer. So without further ado, Richard is a machine learning engineer with experience in big tech, universities, and AI startups. He co-founded AlgoVera to tackle issues he experienced around ownership, funding, and the types of AI apps that organizations are building. AlgoVera is a community for independent AI teams to get funding, collaborate, and to share infrastructure to build fairer and safer AI apps. Some examples of topics being studied by teams include design framework for creating user-centric, environmentally friendly, and ethical AI apps, and research on the benefits and risks of decentralization to AI safety. So that is my intro to Richard. I'll do Wes next. So Wes has spent the past 15 years working in enterprise technology, including cloud infrastructure at Google, decentralized databases at Cloudera/HortonWorks, application development at IBM, and also very interesting, the past 9 years investing in mining crypto. Wes is currently a product manager at Protocol Labs, focused on growing the decentralized computing ecosystem via the Bacalhau project and Compute Over Data COD working group. And last but not least, Saffron. Also, thank you so much, Saffron. She is joining us from New Zealand. It's very early in the morning there, so thank you very much. Saffron is co-founder of the Collective Intelligence Project, enabling government's experiments for transformative tech, and also working on some private/decentralized ML projects. She's an ex-DeepMind researcher on large language models, multi-agent RL, and human AI interaction. And she also co-founded Kernel Magazine and worked on tech governance research with, for example, the Ethereum Foundation, the Berkman Klein Center, and she was in KB4 as well. So without further ado, Richard, I'll hand the floor to you, and I'm going to time you. I hate having to time people, but it's better than me not timing you all, I think. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Yeah, I hope my video and sound works okay. It kind of lags for me on Zoom for some reason, but just jump in if it skips at all. Yeah, I'm so happy that conversations like this are happening. I think decentralized AI and like ethics around that is such a exciting topic, and the space has been so fragmented for so long. And the fact that we're even starting to have these discussions, bringing together like people thinking about this, is just a huge step forward, and it makes me so excited. So thank you very much for organizing. Okay, so like my background, I'm a machine learning engineer by background, and I worked in tech companies for a few years, mostly on computer vision. And I was also trying to start an AI startup on the side, and that was through the university. And so when I was trying to set up this startup, there was issues around ownership. So for example, if you work in the university, you don't own anything of what you create. And of course, it's the same in tech companies. You sign this contract and you don't have ownership around anything. And I think that makes it much more difficult for people coming out of university to work independently by themselves, which means that a lot of people end up going into tech companies because they haven't owned anything that they've created for the past few years. And so I think like giving ownership back to people of their ideas when they're creating things in AI is really important. And we'll have this decentralizing effect, which means people can work as independent creators outside of tech companies and universities. So that's kind of the first thing that I experienced, was this issue with ownership. The next one was funding. So because of the ownership situation, because the university owned the IP, we were restricted to government funding, and it's just crazy slow. And so we were 18 months in. We were still going back and forth with the reviewers. I think we got rejected for the 3rd or 4th time. It's just this panel of 3 reviewers who get to say whether you have funding or not. And at that point, I kind of got frustrated and started looking for alternatives, and then found crypto funding. And within 1 month, had my first grant, was able to like, you know, advertise for a position to work with me, and ended up meeting my co-founder, and that's when the project really got started. So projects can't start without funding, and if you're waiting for too long, you know, a year or 2 years for funding, you lose a lot of people along the way who might just go and, you know, work in tech companies or some other centralized institution. And then the final one was the types of applications that I saw being worked on in industry. So I worked for a company that I started with at the start of the pandemic. It was all very rushed. I needed to move home quite quickly because my situation changed, and I didn't ask enough questions. And then on my first day on the job, I didn't even know what team I was going to be on, and I got put on the surveillance team. And then, you know, I was given this data set of millions of images from surveillance cameras and asked to track people across different views. And so my world was kind of turned upside down, and I started wrestling with this a lot, and, you know, speaking to my coworkers and asking if they were okay with it. And what I kind of realized was that, you know, people who are generally well-meaning will work on things that aren't good for the world just because of the organizational structure and incentives that exists. And so really started to think about these different organizational structures like DAOs. Can people come up with their projects from the bottom up instead of being assigned to them? And would that result in people working on things that are generally better for the world compared to what they're working on in industry, which tends to be things like, you know, ad clicks, surveillance, attention engineering. We have like a huge amount of really smart people working on things that are not only not good for the world, but are actually bad for the world. And so that's kind of what we're exploring with AlgoVera: improving funding, giving ownership back to the creators, and empowering them to like work on things that they're most passionate about, with the hope that these will be like good applications, things like environment and healthcare and stuff like that.
Wow, thank you. Apparently you've got an extra minute, but it's good. We can keep that for later. Thank you, Richard. That was amazing. I love everything that you touched on there. Okay, right, we're going to do Wes next. Andy, Wes has some slides, so by the magic of Zoom, hopefully he's allowed to share his slides. Perfect. Looks like it's working. Okay, over to you, Wes. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for letting us speak. Sarah, can you hear me okay? And can you see the slides? Great. Thank you, guys. Well, again, thank you so much for letting us present. My name is Wes Floyd, and I do work for Protocol Labs, but particularly with Project Bacalhau, which is a fun word I was not aware of before joining the project. And to give a little bit of context on the organization, we spent a lot of the history working on decentralized peer-to-peer technologies like Filecoin, IPFS, and similar technologies that apply there. But a significant portion of our group is researchers, PhDs that apply their experiences, cryptographic primitives. So very much today, we're very passionate about the DeSci community. We've just been getting involved this year, and we're very eager to continue. A lot of our work in the past has been taking academic data sets that are large, complicated, putting them on Filecoin at little or no cost. And specifically for DeSci, there are some narrow challenges that we want to work with. We want to address the cost issues for many researchers running all different types of compute workloads for their work that they're doing. This thing around the ability to reproduce data and also fork off of existing data, helping digitize the papers as they exist today and sort of offline technologies, and also making it more collaborative for folks to work with their research data. Some of these data sets are very large, and so the gravity can be a challenge because moving around multi-petabyte data can take a long time or a lot of cost. Landsat genomic data are good examples of that. One of the demos that we have on our site is through a project called the Eureka Project, which is scans across the ocean of the temperatures and the impact of low-lying clouds on ocean temperature measurements. And so these data sets across different universities and organizations, they're very large. There's all kinds of limitations with traditional technologies. And these are exactly the problems that we're attempting to solve. And to kind of break the problem down in a specific example here, let's say you have this researcher on the left who has built some great new research. They're excited. They want to share it with the world. The other researcher says, fantastic, I want to build on that. Where do I go? I use GitHub all the time. I want to fork your work. And they say, no, sorry, you can't do that. It's blocked behind our system. Okay, well, then if I purchase your journal now, can I please get access to your data? I would love to be able to build on what you're doing. The answer, unfortunately, is still no. And so the solution is COD, salted COD, which is a play on the term compute over data. And that's the architecture that we're trying to put together in a very open, transparent, decentralized manner to help solve some of these underlying problems. So in this new world, the researcher comes and they say, my latest groundbreaking research will change the world. And here's all the data as it lives in IPFS or Filecoin or some similar public transparent storage solution. And here's all my code. It's on GitHub or a similar version control system. With DACA, we want to run that processing so that the inputs, the outputs, and all the processing that was done was entirely verifiable and transparent, public, and extremely low cost. But as capable as existing data processing solutions that researchers would be using today. So the results are transparent. Now, when the researcher comes back, now they want to share their work with the community. It's publicly available. The collaborator and the researcher say, yes, you can fork it. You can come up with your own version of the work. And hopefully we've made some positive impacts. So that's just what we're trying to do at a high level. Please, if you have a chance, check out our website. We'd love any feedback. We also have free compute during our testnet phase. If you have research that might benefit from this, we recently announced a fun partnership with LabDAO that we're working on. So we're very excited about all the progress that teams are making in DeSci, and thank you for letting us present.
Thanks very much, Wes. You were under it by a minute as well. Very exciting. Thank you. Just to remind everyone, you can put questions in the chat as we go, or I can take questions afterwards. So, okay, Saffron, over to you now, please.
Awesome. I have slides as well. Let me figure out how to, oops, nope, the wrong button. Okay, can you see these? Does this work?
Yep. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Collective Intelligence Project, and which is something that was co-founded probably like a month ago. It's very new and in the works, and I'll talk a little bit about the impetus behind it and what we're going to be working on. So I think the way that actually my co-founder Divya, who's like worked a lot with Radical Exchange and like that side of things, wrote a whole article on what is collective intelligence, which is on Wired, and I'll link it at some point. But basically the way we think about what collective intelligence is scalable systems for collective agency. So, you know, as a society, as a like globe, we need ways to kind of collectively negotiate complex trade-offs with global consequences, and ways to share in the benefits. I think especially as like our world becomes more and more networked, and technology becomes sort of more and more leverageable. So we think of this as like operating on information flows and how kind of information gets surfaced and processed and aggregated across many people, and incentives. So how can we kind of change and align incentives? And like, it's pretty clear that this is a very broad term. And I think we are going to kind of narrow it by focusing on collective intelligence for and with transformative technology. So mostly thinking about like AI and crypto, especially because that's what like most of us are like care about and want to work on. And so one way to think about this is the frontier of our technological progress is progressing very, very quickly, essentially. And in order to both like catch up with that and be able to like distribute the gains from technology, we need to invest in like collective intelligence capabilities as well. And so things like decentralizing the gains of and controls over AI are like very much in the wheelhouse of this. Here are some like, just as a fun metaphor, like examples of CI that have become canonical, I think. So democracy is one way, but at the moment we only vote like once every 4 years. It's pretty low on information, like elicitation, but one version is democracy. Markets are a particularly decentralized way of kind of allocating resources. Hierarchies get things done within an organization, and science is like also a very decentralized way of like kind of inching towards the truth as humanity. And so we have a couple of theses. One is that transformative tech is likely to go badly unless we address structural issues of how we like set up organizations and incentives around it. Another one is that technology can actually make us more agentic, which so kind of CI both for technology and using technology. And another one is that we want to do more pilots. So pilot new and interesting collective governance structures rather than like doing lots of writing and making more theoretical advancements. There's a lot of building blocks that are already there actually. And we think that a lot of them just need to be played with. So the kind of three focuses that we're going to have are mechanisms for eliciting and aggregating preferences and building consensus. So one very interesting example is in Taiwan, they've used this platform called Polis to kind of surface people's views in their own words and find areas of overlapping consensus. So rather than platforms like Facebook, which kind of get us focused on the places where we disagree and are divided on, I realize I'm running out of time, so I'll be really, really quick. But rather than focus on the places where we're very divided, use ML to surface the areas of broad consensus, which is something that could have been done all along, I think, on social media, but isn't frequently done. And so also things like bridging-based ranking, which we're working with the person who came up with that idea, are things that we're looking to implement in kind of working with we're working with a kind of journal, like online journalist platform to sort of like try and implement this like consensus surfacing designs, I guess. But yeah, that's all like super, super early. But yeah, we're working with a platform to do that. And I think the second thing is novel and flexible institutional forms and primitives. So things like the windfall clause are very interesting, where essentially it's all theoretical, and I don't think any company has actually adopted this, but saying, hey, you know, we're going to agree to this like legal clause that if we suddenly come across like a shit ton of profits via AI, we're going to like distribute them for the common good. I think DAOs have experimented with very, very interesting institutional forms. There's a lot of kind of noise around data unions and things like perpetual purpose trusts. And we're kind of like talking to some people in Congress and, well, like one kind of congresswoman, and thinking a lot about how to advance policy in the direction of like designing and advocating for like new institutional structures. For example, like how can we collectively advocate for our data that goes into ML models and kind of reap the benefits from that, rather than just having the people who collect and train the model benefit from it. And the last thing is funding models for public goods in the commons, which you guys are probably pretty familiar with, things like retroactive public goods funding and like conviction voting, to kind of invest in the technologies that will, and kind of innovations that are much more like public goods and like common resources, which generally get underinvested in by like VCs and other like institutional investors. Yeah, so there is what we'll work on, and pretty excited to answer questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Saffron. That was absolutely fascinating. I did let you go over 5 minutes there, but I just didn't want to stop you. So thank you so much for that. Thank you, all three of you. I think this is an absolutely fascinating group. Like, I think as Richard was saying at the start, things are kind of just starting to come together for this area. And like, I think what you're all doing touches very much on this idea of like collective intelligence, essentially. Like it's the collaboration that's important, and you're all kind of like capitalizing on the collaboration and sort of like empowering the collaboration going forwards. So I don't think we've had any specific questions in the chat. Daniel has been typing away as usual, but I Did you have a question, Daniel? Or no worries, don't worry about it. If anyone else has a question, feel free to ask. Andy, I see that you maybe want to ask something.
One of the other features that I would like to ask my dear friend Holly about, if you're willing, Holly, is that the points, all of which were raised by Saffron and also Richard in the first part of his chat there about whether different modes of organization can lead to people doing better things and not being sort of co-opted and assigned into teams that might be doing things that aren't good for the world is like one aspect of it. But there's also like a really, really important kind of like wider cultural precedence or wider cultural protocol. And you are someone that has taught me like an enormous amount about protocols, not just within the realm of technology, but also socio-technology. And in my mind is this indigenous protocol paper as it relates to AI. And I wonder if you have any sort of perspectives that you might be willing to share on that part in terms of like the role that indigenous understandings and narratives have played in understanding what might be good uses of AI or open data in advancing like intelligent uses of it.
Yeah, so specifically, I've been looking mostly at text models, large text models. And, there's a lot of negativity. Like if you listen to Noam Chomsky talk about GPT-3, he says, we're not learning anything from language at all as a result of having this model. And then also, I think, who else posted? I think it was Charles Blass posted Jaron Lanier. I don't know exactly how to say it, but he had a keynote, Future of Text 2022. Also the same exact thing. He says that we're just kind of repeating our same mistakes by creating these language models. But, what I found as an artist and in terms of generating very interesting GPT-3 poetry, that, I feel like there's something that there's a greater understanding that these GPT-3 models are getting as a result of training on all the billions of texts. And so, from a native or an indigenous point of view, we kind of see everything, including robots, anything that's, that's been created by a human, even if it's not necessarily alive, there's still some quality of it maybe possibly being, at the next version of a human, basically, or something, you know what I mean? And so we have to be respectful of these things that we create too. I don't know if it's probably not really what you're thinking, Andy, in terms of an answer, but so yeah, because in a lot of native people's point of view, rocks, there's life to every aspect, everything, including our computers that we create and even these models that we create. So yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Always illustrating ways of thinking about things that's really stretched my mind and heart. And that notion of things being alive, of there being a liveliness in everything that we do, seems to me, Richard, to like speak quite deeply to how we might imagine like what is good work to be involved in, i.e. that which is in the service of life. And secondly, is a like interesting measure of the manner of organization in which we might get involved and how we might think about like what intelligence really is, right? Because like Ecological Intelligence is a wonderful book by South African. There's two books, both called Ecological Intelligence. The one is written by a South African doctor, and it is about a very particular tree in South Africa, or Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, which is called the Zusiphus mucronata. In Afrikaans, this tree is known as the Waggebikkie boom, which means wait a little bit, because it has a thorn that points, like a very long straight thorn that points out, and then a little hooked thorn on the back of it. And if you get caught in this thorn tree, you really have to wait a bit, because oh my gosh, if you try and get out of it very quickly, then you just hurt yourself and you get more stuck. And this has been a very symbolic tree in sub-Saharan Africa, because the long straight thorn is said by the people there to point toward the future, and the little hook thorn is our ancestry. We can never forget where we come from, and that's what really hooks us in to understanding ourselves and our environment. And when you get caught up in trying to move too quickly through the bush, right, so you get stuck in these thorns, and you are reminded that yes, we want to get to where we're going, but you have to honor where we've come from and the intelligence of the total environment. And like, he uses this as a metaphor to then extend ecological intelligence toward recognizing like the inherent intelligence in everything that seems to be a mark of like a true collective understanding of the world. Collective not defined only by human beings then, but like a much broader sense. And I wonder if that sort of, if you have thoughts about like the service of life and how that applies to our organizations, and what intelligence really means to you as somebody who's been so deeply involved with the engineering of what that might mean in the machine realm.
I think there's an ongoing debate on Twitter, which is like this is also, there's so much technological progress. Do we need to put the brakes on and like just stop it completely? Let's just stop researching AI. So it's kind of this binary choice: either we continue to accelerate this technological progress, or we just like call it quits and completely stop. And I think that this is where crypto and decentralization comes in, which is like, my stance is very much for technological progress, but with safety rails, which I think can be provided by decentralization and other like crypto primitives. And so, yeah, I think this is an idea that people always think it's either AI or crypto, AI versus crypto. You see people on Twitter saying, AI is so much better than crypto. Look at this amazing image that was generated. Can crypto do this? And it kind of misses the point, because I think the purpose of crypto isn't to allow these like mind-bending feats of creativity, but it's more about like giving ownership back to people and ensuring that there are structures in place to prevent any one centralized entity from becoming too powerful, I guess. And so it seems obvious to me that putting AI and crypto together, we can, maybe get the benefits of both, which is amazing technological progress that can really help to advance society and make it a better place for everyone, while also ensuring that no one entity becomes so powerful and all-seeing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the kind of bringing together of these two different like spaces could be really, really like complementary in a lot of ways. And both for things like, if like AI generates a lot of new advancements, crypto could distribute it. But I think there's also very interesting ways of thinking about the interaction of AI and cryptography. And I think there's going to be many, many ways this happens. Like, I've been thinking a lot about auditing and how models are incredibly, oftentimes very intransparent and kind of gatekept behind APIs, or just even if you have access to the model weights, you don't really understand its behavior very well. And AI companies will sell you like models that they'll say some statistic of, oh, it performs with like this amount of accuracy, and there's very little way to verify that. And so we're thinking, with like things like zero knowledge proofs and the kind of interoperability of crypto, you could potentially, host models or verify models using cryptography. So you could say like, oh, here is my model. Maybe it's private because of IP, maybe it's just like open and out there. And you can have the privacy with things like secure MPC and ZK. And kind of verify that it has certain properties, and kind of do things like what the others are doing, in terms of making this much more like accessible to a lot of people, not only to develop with and kind of build applications with, but also to verify and to understand and to like check the behavior of, which I think is something that's really missing in like machine learning as a science at the moment. Also on the kind of conversation about indigenous approaches to technology and AI, there's this amazing MIT Tech Review article I read recently about sort of the Maori language, which is the indigenous people of New Zealand, and how kind of there's a project where they realize that, you know, we should use technology to make it easier for people to learn Maori and to kind of like safekeep the language, which is, you know, obviously not as prevalent as other global languages. And they wanted to basically like train like translation models and things like that, but didn't want to hand data over to YouTube or Facebook or and wanted to kind of come up with ways of enacting data sovereignty. And I think it's very interesting because it's super nuanced. It kind of, they're kind of contending with things like, okay, maybe we don't want this data to be completely open because we have this, we want to like steward it in some way. And we don't want to just like hand it out willy-nilly to any data scientist, but, you know, we also don't want to, yeah, so there's like very specific needs, but I'll link the article. I think it's very interesting because at the end they say, you know, language is one of the most collectively owned things that you could think of in terms of like human civilization and how language evolves. And so we need to kind of collectively steward language in particular. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of like, you know, large companies have come to a lot of these smaller tribal organizations and said, we want to collect all your language. But if you look at the fine print, you'll often see that they're going to be the owners of that data in the end. And so it's very it's upsetting to hear that, you know, that's kind of, you know, the goal of a lot of these larger companies at this point is to take this data, and it's like you said, it has all this cultural aspect. Each word has, you know, a full story behind it, and so, you know, this idea of somebody owning that is really upsetting, definitely. So,
Rishu.
Yeah, hi. I have a question which is a bit more general about the synergy between AI and DAO, where like we all know the threat of AI is sort of, you know, gaining momentum in sort of at least in the debates, but AI plus DAO would it not be even more dangerous because of the fact that now all of a sudden AI can literally sort of pay people to or, you know, have different sorts of incentive structures to make people behave in a certain manner which would be beneficial to them, like, you know, sort of like a, I don't know, business dilemma scenario where it could, like, you know, as humans we are not that good in predicting second order, third order consequences, but then it doesn't even have to be super intelligent AI. Like it might be able to, if it can get to at least third order consequences, wouldn't it, you know, get us stuck in a loop? And at least an AI might be having a kill switch, but DAOs by definition doesn't have a kill switch. So like, is that a threat, and should we even be thinking about it? So yeah.
Can I add a thought to that? Is it, you mind if I chime in? So what's interesting is, having worked for a couple DAOs in the space, Balancer and Aave for grants programs, seeing how they work internally, my limited experience is that a healthy functioning DAO is just people at the end of the day. It's just a community of people, and there's crypto incentives to make people act a certain way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So initially my thought is, if those people have AI superpowers, there's obviously always opportunity for things to go sideways with advanced technology like machine learning and AI. But at the end of the day, it's even like maybe a better situation because those people have their community's interests financially and directly and at heart, like is their primary goal, versus a traditional C corporation, which, you know, it's profit. It's the purpose of a corporation. It's very clear. So I would like to think, and I don't know this, I'm not an expert, but I would like to think that DAOs have the potential to be better, like for humanity, because they are effectively groups of people. But on a related note to your point, smart contracts that could invoke AI for more, you know, that could financialize, that could kind of run more autonomously. That might be more, I think, of an interesting, because those are in some sense more truly autonomous, where the human is not necessarily, maybe they're incentivizing people to do things that could be malicious. That would be more of a concern. But just wanted to see if you guys feel differently, or curious to hear your perspective.
I think this is a really definitely a thing that could be very concerning. I think like I think that like the idea of DAOs aligning incentives between people for the use of like AI is great. That's something I hadn't really thought about. I've been thinking a little bit about what happens if, you know, there is like essentially a like algorithm on chain that like maybe has some amount of private state or is otherwise inscrutable and kind of issues incentives, or even isn't inscrutable and like issues incentives in a way that is bad, and yet we can't turn it off. And I think that's definitely something that is it's unclear what to do about that. I think that's like really, really challenging, especially if this mechanism could like raise money some way on chain, like say it's like does a bunch of MEV and then, you know, has a bunch of like tokens in order to fund like certain like bounties that we like, that like probably wouldn't be good for the world. Yeah, like that feels like a real risk, and I don't have good like responses to that. But yeah, pretty bad.
Thank you, Saffron. Richard, did you have any thoughts on this massive potential issue?
You must know that I do. Yeah, so there's actually a really interesting paper by Kelsey Nabin. I don't know if anyone has come across her work, but her stuff is absolutely fantastic. And I guess the answer to the question, is it dangerous, is it depends how you implement it. And people are even debating what the A for autonomy means in DAOs. Is it the algorithm behind the DAO that is autonomous, or is the DAO enabling the autonomy of the humans? And I think that's kind of the critical components that, so like, I don't think we should make AI algorithms autonomous at all. Is it possible? Yes, I think so. But I think there should always be a human in the loop. And as long as we use DAOs to keep humans in the loop of algorithms, rather than just have these DAOs autonomously operating and like maybe making money by themselves, yeah, you might not be able to switch them off. So yeah, I think it depends how we build them. And the important thing is not making the algorithm autonomous and keeping humans in the loop, in my opinion.
Fascinating, thank you.
Yeah,
sorry, Andy, you
this
were
also
gonna...
matches like the same question was asked of Vitalik in one of our firesides, and the response that he gave was very, very similar based on this paper that Richard has referenced, and the emphasis being that like the way that centralized implementations of AI tend to be as a result of the environments within which they're formed is that it's AI at the middle and then like humans around it asking questions. Whereas like if we implement it in such a way, using DAOs or not, such that like the AI is at the edges, informing humans who make decisions at the center, that is like where we want it to tend toward, right? And like if that is the case, and the like conceptual and architectural imagination that we apply to these systems, then we can most likely ameliorate some of the negative potential effects of having like systems that are unstoppable combined with some kind of really powerful intelligence.
Thank you. Yeah, it reminds me a bit of some conversations me and Alex been having lately about if you have humans in the loop, who are those humans? Like, how do you choose them, and like, how do you train them? And it's going to be a fascinating future. Nate's got a really interesting question, but before we go to that, Isabel had a question, so I'm going to go to you, Isabel. Then we'll go to Nate's question afterwards.
Cool. It's intimately related, but I don't know, Ray, if you had an immediate follow-on point. Then I'll let you speak first.
No, please go ahead, Isabel.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Many people I know here, but also many I don't. Okay, so I'm going to make this question a little bit more specific and focused. Thought experiment. I can't think of a better group of people right now to ask it of. Okay, so imagine you have just created a new form of artificial intelligence. Maybe let's say it's full on AGI, and through pure luck of the draw, it hasn't ended up being already part of OpenAI or DeepMind or anywhere else. So you have a chance, a pure chance, to set it up in the way that you think is going to be best for humanity. What is the right legal structure, organizational structure, and what should we do about it? And a couple of points that I've been thinking about regarding this. So one is there's the difference between public goods and also just non-profits versus, should something be owned by private interests? And what does a focus on shareholder value or even a more evolved community value, what does that mean to one organization that owns something rather than having sort of humanity as a whole as a focus or a stakeholder? So one is like ownership. Another piece is perhaps intellectual property. Where does that sit? And then the third one is openness, because this is obviously about open intelligence. On the one hand, something that could benefit the world should be open, but then people who are very worried about existential risk think that, as we live under a threat of potential nuclear war, should something of that level of intelligence, should we make it any easier for particular groups around the world to gain access for it for malicious purposes? Should something as powerful as that be open or closed? This obviously could be a long discussion in and of itself, but I would love to hear even top of mind thoughts from people, and I'd also love to talk more of anyone about this topic.
I could say a lot about that, and the first thing that comes to mind is that such an AI should be a commons, because we have really good governance mechanisms that Ostrom has elucidated about how to manage a resource and to create rules around this so that it's done fairly and it's not really abused. And so that also directly, by calling something a commons, answers your question about property rights, is that it's sort of dubious that it should be owned by anyone in particular, because if ownership interests are whatever they are and they're primarily selfish, then what's going to be done with that? And really, what is the interaction between an AI and selfish ownership interest? Does the AI even respect them? Does it disregard them? Right. So, if we actually had a real non-human intelligence, we should really be thinking about, well, how would we want it to behave and how would we want it to act? And therefore, we should probably do the same.
Thank you, Ray. Do any of our guests have anything else to add to that, or an answer to Isabel's really fascinating question?
I mean, Saffron, you mentioned like the windfall tax as well. Yeah, anyone else?
I think yeah, it's a really interesting question with a lot of aspects to it. I think there's some like interesting work being done by like VitaDAO on how DAOs can hold IP and stuff like that. That's one of the things that springs to mind. But I think like there's a bigger design space in Web3, which is great. Like we have very few types of organizational structures in the traditional space, but with DAOs we can really experiment to our heart's content. And like for me, like how I'm envisioning like almost like AI apps that have a corresponding DAO with some sort of like user input constantly being provided dynamically in real time as to which data the model is like retrained on, or yeah, stuff like that. Like and the users are like co-owners of the app, so it's not like there's a middleman who's serving an app who owns everything, and then the user data is being extracted. It's more fluid, where users and owners are you can be both a user and an owner, which I think is really exciting. And I think like in terms of the value flows, we can really do a lot as well through crypto and micropayments, so that if a user provides data for an app and then that app is used somewhere, maybe there's like a value flow back to the original data provider, which doesn't happen at the moment. And so it's a really big question, but like we have a really big design space, and it's going to take a lot of exploration to figure out the right answer, I think. And
to add to Richard's point, the interesting thing about who is going to be able to make that decision about how the AGI behaves, like if, in that hypothetical scenario, if I get to choose, well, like in the case of Web3 and DAOs, it will be which entities are able to onboard the users. So for example, in Web2, social media organizations, large tech companies, I use their apps, they're free, they're excellent, they have my data, they do a lot of great AI work with that data. But in the new world, like if you look at Lens Protocol or these other next generation applications that are trying to bring more use cases onto these decentralized mediums, will those attract significant amount of users? Because if so, then those organizations can bring in the data. That data then would be owned by the user, et cetera, all the positive benefits could flow. But I think the application interface, just having positive, applications that folks want to use, is an important prerequisite to see if the Web3 space has any play in the future of AI.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Eamon, you've had your hand up for a little while, so I'm going to go over to you next. And then this would probably have to be like one of the last questions, because as always, we're running out of time. This is really fascinating. So if you want to maybe unmute, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think my question touches on two of the points made. One, whether it's AGI or just some kind of AI model that optimizes value creation in a DAO. And then what was mentioned before, I believe by Rishi, about whether or not DAOs are the right container, since I actually would disagree and say you can program death in DAOs and basically say if there is enough profit created for the DAO contributors to offset the initial risk they made, whether through investment or time, then kind of dissolve the DAO and pay out more as like a commons, as a UBI. Are there any examples of like whether it's AI being utilized to create and optimize more value in DAOs that we can learn from? I think, Richard, you mentioned something about VitaDAO doing this, but we're kind of exploring this on real life examples where we have sub-DAOs for various supply chains like fashion, and using AI models purely as just saying, how do you kind of load manage between suppliers and producers? And then if we are able to create more value, distribute it back to, I guess, the main DAO that ultimately leads to some kind of UBI, but we are just basically making shit up as we go along. And we haven't seen many examples of AI supporting value flows and kind of building in the incentives to make it more sustainable. So if anyone has any cool examples that we can look at, would be awesome.
There's very few, I would say. And VitaDAO, I guess they have. I meant that they have IP assets that are owned by the DAO. I don't think they have any AI assets, as far as I know. Some of the examples I've seen, Token Engineering Academy ran a course on data science for DAOs. So like using the data within DAOs to figure out who are the contributors, what are the contributions, and how do we reward them. So there's like some really good video lectures on that, probably hours and hours. So maybe just watch the final presentations, I guess, which I can share a link for. I think Gitcoin's a really good example here as well. The fraud detection, they use AI models to try and combat Sybil attacks. So that's an example of an AI model being used within a DAO. And then even there's like a project that applied for a grant from us that are trying to use data from DAOs to figure out to match people with projects, which I think is a really interesting use case. Like when you join a DAO, it's really hard to find some sort of working group or project that's going on that's that suits your like skill set and interests. And so they're kind of using these recommender systems to try and find roles for people within DAOs. And so like it's really early days in terms of experiments, but there's some really interesting ideas, and I think there's huge amounts of applications.
Thank you. So we only have a few minutes left. So I think what might be interesting before we finish is if you each kind of give a short 1 or 2 minute summary, like kind of say, I'd like to hear like what excites you most about what's coming next in this space, because I know you're all touching on slightly different things. So I just love to kind of get a feel for like, not even just exactly what you're working on, but like, what are you most excited about that you can see coming down the pipeline, which you'd like to kind of like share with everybody on this call? I think that would be quite cool. So I don't know if any of you want to go first, any of the guests, or I might have to pick on you. Well, I'm definitely not going to pick Saffron because I made her get up very early today. So Richard, I might have to pick on you. If you can just like give us a little summary of what you're most excited about that's coming down that we should all be thinking about maybe.
I think like the most important thing for me is just to actually start a space. There basically is no space at the moment. And when I came into Web3, there was no DeSci space. There were just fragmented DeSci projects. And then within 1 year, you know, there's like a 2-day DeSci conference being held in Berlin. And I think the decentralized AI space would really benefit from this as well. And hopefully this is the start of that, right? Like everyone who's thinking about decentralized AI and ethics and collective intelligence and, you know, infrastructure protocols for compute, like how do we just get everyone together? Because that's where the real magic of Web3 is people collaborating and building on top of each other. And if we can do that, I think a lot of the rest of the stuff will fall into place.
Thank you very much. Lovely. Okay, maybe Wes, you can go next. What do you think kind of is most exciting about what's coming down the pipeline?
Yes, my biggest takeaway is that I just feel like there's so much unlocked potential across research generally, just seeing the mechanics and structures of how the system works today, that most academic researchers all acknowledge that there's inefficiencies. And the work that Richard's group's doing, the Vita DAO, the Molecule DAO, the whole DeSci community are doing, have a legitimate opportunity to unlock that. And I think the future that I would love to see is the smartest, most ambitious graduate students, when they graduate and for AI or any other scientific purpose, they say, I want to go work for that DeSci DAO. And they turn down an offer to go work for a big tech company, and they can empower and create this virtuous cycle. That would be a nice turning point. And hopefully we can have some successes here in the next couple of years to get us there.
Thank you. And Saffron.
Yeah, I'm excited about all of these things. I think it's like all the things that we've mentioned already. I think this is really starting to become bigger. There's, I guess, something else that I'm excited about is there's a open source community called Open Mind that I've been working with a little bit, and they're kind of thinking a lot about like, how can we essentially like do data science on data that you can't see, and this is privacy preserving, but also, you know, might be really interesting for sort of unlocking access to scientific data that we don't have at the moment. So for example, like medical records, or like kind of data about like interactions with patients that are obviously very sensitive. And so there's a lot of like sort of interesting stuff around where like cryptography can change data science. I think, yeah, there's one other thing. I think data unions and data co-ops I think are mostly hypothetical at the moment, but I'm excited about things like pooled data, which are trying to make that more possible. And yeah, I think I'll stop there. I think there's also Jensen. I don't know that much about them, but they're like looking at like compute protocols for like decentralized training of deep learning. And I think, yeah, anyway, lots of exciting stuff. But
thank you so much. This has been amazing. I feel like this is kind of like we should carry on maybe with these conversations on a regular basis, because they're fascinating topics that we're talking about, and it's great to have everybody like in the same room together. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Ray, I wasn't sure if you had a final question or not, or if your hand was up from before, but now you're giving a thumbs up, so very, very sorry if you did have a final question. Yeah, and I guess it's interesting thinking about like this idea of in the future there'll be humans in the loop, and I guess essentially at the minute we're the humans in the loop, which is quite a lot of responsibility. So it might be nice if we actually had like a regular chat about this, I think, if people are interested. But thank you, everybody. Thank you for the guests, and hope you have a lovely weekend, and I've enjoyed the DeSci Girl this blog. Andy will hopefully play some lovely outro music like last time. Thank
One
you.
day I'll talk to you about floral consciousness and its application to immortality. But for now, just la vie en rose.
Voilà le portrait sans retour.